The night Daniel left, the rain fell with a patience that felt deliberate, as though the sky itself had been waiting for permission to mourn. He stood by the apartment window, not looking at her, not really seeing anything at all, fingers tightening around his phone like a lifeline to somewhere else. Mara sensed the ending before he spoke. Some endings arrive loudly, breaking things, throwing accusations into the air. Others arrive quietly, disguised as exhaustion, dressed in careful words meant to soften betrayal. "I didn't plan this," he said finally, voice thin, rehearsed. The words landed heavily between them. Mara watched his reflection in the glass instead of his face. 3 years together reduced to a speech. 3 years of shared mornings, cheap wine dinners, whispered promises about building something real. She noticed the way he avoided saying her name, as if speaking it might tether him back to guilt. He told her about Elena without saying the details at first, just phrases, opportunities, stability, a future he hadn't been sure he could provide before. Only later did the truth emerge. Elena came from money. Elena owned properties, connections, a lifestyle that turned uncertainty into luxury. Mara nodded as though listening to a stranger recount a story she had already heard somewhere else. Her chest felt hollow, not shattered. The devastation came slowly, like cold seeping through walls. She asked one question, calm enough to frighten him. "When did you decide I wasn't enough?" Daniel flinched. He insisted it wasn't about that. It never was, according to people who left. It was timing. It was growth. It was destiny. Words designed to disguise choice. He packed quickly, avoiding photographs, leaving behind the small clay bowl she had made in a pottery class they once laughed through together. The door closed gently. No slammed exit, no dramatic goodbye, just absence. In the days that followed, silence became a companion. Friends offered sympathy laced with curiosity. Neighbors whispered. Social media confirmed what her heart already knew. Danielle and Elena appeared everywhere together, smiling beneath chandeliers, attending charity events, stepping into a world Mara had never been invited to imagine. Each photograph felt like proof that love could be replaced as easily as furniture upgraded in a larger home. At night, Mara replayed memories, searching for warning signs she might have missed. Had he always looked beyond her? Had ambition slowly rewritten affection? She remembered how Daniel used to complain about money, about feeling stuck, about fearing an ordinary life. She had reassured him that ordinary could still be meaningful. Now she wondered if ordinary had been the very thing he feared most. Weeks passed. The ache sharpened into something quieter, more dangerous: reflection. She stopped checking his profiles. She returned to work earlier than expected, immersing herself in projects she once postponed for weekend plans with him. Architecture had always been her passion, but during their relationship, she had compromised opportunities to maintain stability. Now, with nothing left to preserve, she allowed herself to pursue risk. Late nights became normal again. She sketched relentlessly, designing spaces that emphasized resilience, renewal, light entering through unexpected angles. Her colleagues noticed a change. She spoke less but worked with fierce clarity. One evening, I mentor Sophia pulled her aside and said gently, "Pain neither breaks your vision or sharpens it. You've chosen sharpening." Mara smiled faintly, unsure whether the transformation was strength or survival. Meanwhile, news of Danielle's engagement spread quickly. The announcement appeared online like a polished advertisement. Elegant photos, a diamond ring large enough to reflect an entire future. Comments poured in celebrating their perfect union. Mara felt the sting but refused to indulge bitterness. Instead, she focused on rebuilding herself piece by piece. She moved apartments, choosing a smaller place filled with sunlight rather than memories. She reconnected with friends she had unintentionally neglected. Slowly, She rediscovered laughter, not the carefree kind she once shared with Daniel, but something steadier. And months later, an unexpected email arrived. An exclusive architectural firm announced a collaborative project restoring a historic estate recently purchased by a prominent businesswoman preparing for a high profile wedding. Mara almost declined before reading the client's name, Elena Ionescu. The coincidence felt surreal, almost cruel. She stared at the screen, heart pounding. Accepting meant stepping directly into the world Danielle had chosen over her. Declining meant surrendering an opportunity she had worked years to earn. She accepted. The first meeting took place at the estate, a sprawling property surrounded by manicured gardens and quiet wealth. Elena greeted her warmly, unaware, or perhaps unconcerned, about the history linking them. She was poised, confident, accustomed to command. Mara observed her carefully, searching for the qualities that had drawn Daniel away. Elena spoke enthusiastically about redesigning the venue for her wedding reception, emphasizing elegance, transformation, spectacle. Mara listened professionally, separating personal emotion from creative responsibility. Then Daniel entered the room. Time paused. His expression shifted from polite curiosity to unmistakable shock. He had not expected her. The silence stretched painfully before Elena introduced them, oblivious to the undercurrent. Mara maintained composure, offering a professional handshake. Daniel's eyes searched hers for resentment, grief, accusation. He found none, only calm. That unsettled him more than anger ever could. Meetings continued over the following weeks. Mara remained meticulous, guiding renovations that gradually reshaped the estate. She noticed Danielle watching her during discussions, as though trying to reconcile the woman he once left with the composed professional standing before him now. She no longer sought his approval. She no longer filled silence with reassurance. Her confidence came from work, not relationship. Elena praised her vision openly, often crediting Mara for transforming the venue into something extraordinary. The irony lingered quietly. Mara was designing the celebration of the life Danielle chose instead of her. Yet, instead of reopening wounds, the process clarified something profound. She realized she was no longer competing. She was no longer waiting to be chosen. One afternoon, while reviewing plans alone, Danielle approached her. His voice carried hesitation. He asked how she had been, a question months too late. Mara answered simply, I learned to stand without leaning. He nodded, struggling to articulate regret without betraying his current engagement. He spoke about opportunities, about how life had accelerated after meeting Elena, but beneath his words lay uncertainty. Mara recognized it instantly. The certainty he once lacked with her had not magically appeared. It had merely been disguised by wealth and momentum. She felt no triumph, only clarity. As preparations intensified, media attention surrounded the upcoming wedding. High-profile guests confirmed attendance. Designers, planners, and investors circulated through the estate daily. Mara's reputation quietly grew within elite circles impressed by her work. Offers began arriving from firms abroad. For the first time, her future expanded beyond survival into genuine possibility. One evening, Elena invited her to stay for dinner after a long planning session. Conversation drifted unexpectedly toward relationships. Elena confessed that Daniel sometimes seemed distracted, nostalgic even. She laughed it off, attributing it to stress. Mara listened silently, understanding more than Elena realized. She saw that wealth could create comfort, but not necessarily peace. When she returned home that night, she felt lighter than she had since the breakup. The final weeks before the wedding blurred into controlled chaos. Floral installations arrived. Lighting systems were tested. The estate transformed into a spectacle of perfection. Mara oversaw every detail, ensuring the space reflected harmony and elegance. On the evening before the ceremony, she walked alone through the finished venue, Soft lights illuminated pathways she had designed. Music rehearsals echoed faintly through the halls. She realized she felt proud, not despite the circumstances, but because of them. She had taken heartbreak and built something beautiful without surrendering dignity. The morning of the wedding arrived bright and warm. Guests gathered, dressed in luxury and expectation. Mara attended as both designer and invited guest. Her presence acknowledged formally rather than personally. She wore a simple dress, understated yet confident. When Daniel saw her among the guests, his composure faltered. Throughout the ceremony, his gaze drifted toward her repeatedly, as though witnessing an alternate life unfolding silently across the aisle. Elena remained radiant, unaware of the emotional currents beneath the surface. During the reception, conversations swirled around Mara's work. Influential figures praised her designs, requesting meetings and collaborations. She realized the guest list included opportunities Danielle once believed only wealth could access. She had arrived here through resilience alone. Later, Daniel approached her privately, emotion finally breaking through restraint. He admitted he had underestimated her, underestimated them, underestimated himself. He spoke of doubts he could not voice publicly. Mara listened without judgment. She understood his confession was less about rekindling love and more about confronting the consequences of his choices. She told him gently that some doors closed not to punish, but to redirect. The man who once left searching for certainty now stood uncertain again. Meanwhile, she felt grounded. The irony crystallized in that moment. He had pursued security and lost emotional clarity, while she had lost security and discovered strength. As the evening ended, Mara stepped outside into the garden she had redesigned. Light shimmered against the night sky. Laughter echoed behind her. She realized she no longer felt like the woman abandoned in the rain months ago. She was not defined by rejection or revenge. She was defined by transformation. When she finally walked away from the celebration, she carried no bitterness, only gratitude for the unexpected paths that led her there. The story that once began with heartbreak had rewritten itself into something quieter, but far more powerful. Self worth reclaimed without confrontation, justice delivered without cruelty, and a future built not on being chosen, but on choosing oneself. The days following the wedding ceremony did not slow as Mara expected. Instead, life accelerated with a force she had never experienced before. Invitations arrived faster than she could answer them. Messages from investors, architects, and event planners flooded her inbox, each referencing the estate transformation as though it had been a landmark achievement rather than a project born from personal irony. At first, she assumed the attention would fade once the celebration ended, but it only grew stronger. Photographs of the reception circulated online, and although the bride and groom dominated the headlines, industry insiders focused on something else entirely: the venue itself. Commentators praised the architectural flow, the emotional atmosphere created through light and space, the way the environment seemed to tell a story of renewal without words. Mara read the articles quietly, recognizing pieces of herself embedded in every compliment. She had unknowingly poured her healing into design, and people felt it, even if they did not understand why. Meanwhile, Danielle entered married life surrounded by luxury, yet shadowed by restlessness he struggled to conceal. Friends congratulated him endlessly, reinforcing the narrative that he had made the smartest decision possible. Yet during dinners and public appearances, he caught himself scanning rooms unconsciously, searching for a familiar calm that wealth could not replicate. Elena noticed the subtle distance growing between them. She dismissed it initially as post-wedding fatigue, the emotional crash after months of preparation. Still, she watched him carefully, sensing an absence she could not name. Their home was expansive, filled with expensive art and carefully curated perfection. But Daniel found himself missing imperfections: the laughter in cramped kitchens, conversations that stretched late into ordinary nights, the quiet understanding he once shared without effort. One evening, Elena hosted a gathering to celebrate their marriage among influential acquaintances. Mara attended reluctantly after persistent encouragement from colleagues who insisted her presence was expected. She arrived composed, wearing confidence rather than elegance, and immediately, conversation shifted toward her work rather than the newlyweds. Guests approached her with admiration, discussing collaborations, international projects, and design partnerships. Danielle observed from across the room as people gravitated toward Mara naturally, not out of obligation but genuine respect. The realization unsettled him. She had entered the same world he pursued, yet she belonged there on her own terms. Elena noticed the attention as well. She smiled graciously, yet curiosity flickered behind her eyes. Later that evening, she approached Mara privately, complimenting her talent with sincerity. There was no hostility in her tone, only fascination. Elena admitted she rarely saw professionals command admiration so effortlessly. Mara thanked her politely, maintaining emotional distance. She sensed Elena beginning to see her, not as a former partner of Danielle's, but as an independent presence difficult to ignore. As weeks passed, Mara's schedule transformed completely. She traveled to meetings, presented concepts to investors, and began leading a restoration initiative funded by a cultural foundation, impressed by her work at the estate. Each success strengthened her confidence, yet she remained grounded, aware that ambition without purpose had once destroyed something meaningful in her life. She refused to measure success by status alone. Instead, she pursued projects that restored neglected spaces, believing beauty should serve community rather than ego. Danielle followed her progress silently through news updates and professional circles. Every achievement forced him to confront a quiet truth. The limitations he once associated with her had never been hers at all. They had been projections of his own fear. During one encounter at a charity fundraiser, he finally spoke honestly. He told her he had watched her rise and realized he had mistaken patience for lack of ambition. Mara listened calmly, unaffected by the confession. She no longer needed validation from him. Her response was gentle but firm. People grow differently when they are trusted, she said. Sometimes living reveals the potential neither person could see while together. Danielle sensed the finality in her words. She was not angry. She had simply moved beyond the version of herself that needed him. At home, Elena began noticing deeper fractures in her marriage. Danielle became distracted during conversations, occasionally retreating into silence after social events where Mara was present. Elena confronted him one night, asking whether unresolved feelings lingered. Daniel denied regret, but struggled to articulate his unease. He insisted he loved the life they were building, yet his voice lacked conviction. Elena, accustomed to clarity and control, found uncertainty intolerable. She started investigating subtly, speaking with mutual acquaintances, piecing together fragments of Danielle and Mara's past relationship. The more she learned, the more she recognized that Mara had not been replaced because she lacked value, but because Danielle had feared instability. The discovery unsettled Elena in ways she did not expect. She prided herself on winning, on choosing partners who aligned with ambition and certainty. Now she questioned whether she had married a man still searching for something undefined. Meanwhile, Mara faced her own internal challenge. Success brought admiration but also loneliness. Nights in her new apartment felt quieter than before, and she occasionally wondered whether emotional independence required permanent solitude. Yet, instead of rushing toward distraction, she allowed herself to sit with the feeling. Healing, she realized, did not erase longing. It transformed it into self-awareness. She began mentoring younger designers, finding fulfillment in guiding others through doubts she once carried alone. One afternoon, Sophia visited her office and observed the transformation with pride. She reminded Mara that true resilience reveals itself not through revenge, but through evolution. Mara understood then that the greatest change was invisible. She no longer replayed the breakup as a defining trauma. It had become a chapter rather than the entire story. As autumn approached, Elena announced plans for a philanthropic gala celebrating architectural innovation, appointing Mara as lead creative director. The decision surprised many, including Danielle. Publicly, it appeared strategic, elevating the event's prestige. Privately, it signaled something deeper. Elena respected Mara's brilliance despite personal history. Preparations brought all three into frequent contact again. The dynamic shifted subtly. Elena engaged Mara intellectually, admiring her perspective, while Daniel watched their interactions with increasing introspection. He began recognizing qualities in Mara he had once taken for granted: her emotional intelligence, her quiet strength, her ability to inspire collaboration rather than competition. The gala preparations intensified emotional tension beneath professional cooperation. Rumors circulated among guests about the unusual connection linking designer, bride, and husband. Some expected drama, others anticipated confrontation, yet none occurred. Instead, Mara maintained dignity, Elena maintained composure, and Daniel confronted his own discomfort privately. During a late evening planning session, Elena asked Mara a question that lingered heavily in the air. "Do you ever regret how things ended?" Mara considered carefully before answering. She admitted she once believed loss meant failure. Now she understood loss sometimes protects people from becoming smaller versions of themselves. Elena studied her expression thoughtfully, sensing wisdom rather than bitterness. That conversation marked a quiet turning point. Elena began reevaluating her marriage not through jealousy, but through honesty. She noticed how Danielle spoke differently when discussing Mara's ideas, how admiration softened his voice unconsciously. For the first time, Elena questioned whether success alone could sustain emotional fulfillment. As the gala approached, media coverage intensified again. Mara's name appeared alongside prominent figures, establishing her as a rising force in architecture. Daniel felt pride mixed with regret each time he saw her recognized. He realized he had once measured worth by financial security, overlooking emotional partnership as an equal foundation. Watching her now, he understood she had never been the limitation he feared. She had been the stability he failed to value. On the night before the gala, Mara walked through the nearly completed venue, echoing the solitude she experienced before the wedding months earlier. Lights glowed softly across structures she had envisioned from nothing. She paused, reflecting on the strange paths that brought her back into the orbit of people who once defined her pain. Yet standing there, she felt no resentment, only growth. She had transformed heartbreak into momentum, rejection into reinvention. Behind her, footsteps approached quietly. Daniel stopped a few feet away, uncertainty evident in his posture. He began to speak but hesitated, as though realizing words might finally arrive too late. Mara turned calmly, ready not for reconciliation but for closure, shaped by clarity rather than emotion. The moment lingered unresolved, heavy with everything unspoken, signaling that the true confrontation between past and present had not yet fully arrived, but was drawing inevitably closer. The gala opened beneath a sky so clear it felt symbolic, as if the world itself had decided to witness whatever truth was about to unfold. Guests arrived in waves of elegance and expectation, stepping onto marble pathways, illuminated by soft golden light that seemed to float rather than shine. Every detail reflected Mara's vision: subtle transitions between spaces, music that guided emotion without overpowering conversation, architecture that invited reflection as much as admiration. Conversations began immediately about the venue's atmosphere. Influential figures spoke not only of beauty, but of feeling. Many described a strange sense of calm upon entering, unaware that the design mirrored the emotional journey of the woman who created it. Mara moved through the crowd professionally, greeting donors and collaborators, her presence steady and self-assured. Months earlier, she might have felt intimidated standing among such wealth and influence. Now she felt equal, neither impressed nor diminished. Daniel watched her from across the room, noticing how easily she belonged here. He realized something unsettling. She no longer appeared as someone who had risen after being left behind. She appeared as someone who had always been meant for this world, only delayed by circumstances. Elena, meanwhile, observed both of them carefully. She had grown perceptive over recent weeks, attuned to subtle emotional currents others overlooked. She noticed the way Danielle's posture shifted when Mara entered the room, the unconscious attention he gave her voice, even when engaged in other conversations. Yet, Elena did not react with anger. Instead, she studied Mara with genuine curiosity, trying to understand the woman whose absence seemed to shape her husband's presence. As speeches began, Mara remained near the back, content to let others occupy the spotlight. But midway through the evening, the foundation director unexpectedly invited her onto the stage, praising her work publicly. Applause filled the hall, louder and longer than she anticipated. Cameras turned toward her. She hesitated briefly before stepping forward. The microphone felt heavier than expected. She spoke simply, avoiding self-praise, explaining that architecture at its best tells human stories, stories of resilience, second chances, and transformation. Her words resonated deeply, drawing emotional silence from the audience. Daniel felt pride tighten in his chest, followed quickly by regret so sharp it nearly forced him to look away. Elena listened closely, recognizing authenticity she rarely encountered in elite circles, driven by performance rather than sincerity. When Mara finished, guests rose in a standing ovation. The moment shifted the energy of the entire event. She was no longer just the designer behind the scenes. She had become the emotional center of the evening. Afterward, conversations revolved around her vision. Investors requested private meetings. International firms expressed interest in collaboration. Elena approached her again, this time with visible admiration rather than polite professionalism. She admitted the speech moved her deeply, confessing she rarely saw passion expressed without ambition overshadowing it. Mara thanked her, sensing sincerity rather than competition. Their conversation felt unexpectedly peaceful. Two women acknowledging each other beyond the complicated history connecting them. Across the room, Danielle struggled internally. Watching Mara receive recognition forced him to confront a painful realization. He had left not because she lacked potential, but because he lacked patience. He had chosen certainty over growth, comfort over faith. Now the certainty he gained felt fragile compared to the authenticity he lost. Later in the evening, as guests drifted toward the outdoor terrace, Elena quietly asked Danielle a question she had avoided for weeks. She asked whether he still loved Mara. The question struck him with brutal honesty. He tried to answer carefully, explaining that love changes, that life moves forward. But Elena saw through the hesitation. She did not accuse him. She simply nodded, absorbing the truth hidden between his words. For the first time since their marriage began, silence settled between them, not as comfort, but as awareness. Meanwhile, Mara stepped outside to escape the noise. The night air carried a gentle coolness, and she allowed herself a rare moment of vulnerability. Success had come quickly, almost overwhelming in its intensity. Yet, standing alone beneath the light, she realized something profound. She no longer measured her worth through anyone's choice. She felt whole independent of relationship or recognition. Footsteps approached again. This time, Elena joined her. The two women stood side by side without tension. Helena spoke softly, admitting she had spent months trying to understand how someone could live a relationship like the one Mara and Danielle shared. She confessed that wealth and status had always made decisions simple for her, problems solved with resources, emotions managed through control. But recently she sensed something missing, something money could not provide. Mara listened carefully, recognizing courage in Elena's honesty. She replied that love cannot survive where fear leads decisions. Sometimes people mistake security for happiness. Elena smiled faintly, acknowledging the truth without resentment. Inside the gala, whispers spread rapidly. Guests noticed the unusual calm between former partner and wife. Some anticipated confrontation, others scandal, yet none came. Instead, the atmosphere shifted toward introspection. The event transformed from social spectacle into something unexpectedly human. Later, during a closing toast, Elena surprised everyone by publicly thanking Mara again, crediting her not only for the venue, but for reminding everyone present that success without authenticity feels empty. The acknowledgement drew stunned reactions. Daniel watched, realizing Elena understood more than he expected. The evening ended without drama, yet emotional consequences lingered heavily. After guests departed, Daniel approached Mara privately. His composure finally cracked. He admitted he had been trying to convince himself he made the right decision, yet watching her tonight forced him to confront lingering feelings he never resolved. He did not ask for forgiveness or reconciliation. He simply confessed confusion. Mara responded gently but firmly. She told him she no longer belonged to the version of life defined by waiting for him to recognize her worth. The love they shared had been real, but its purpose had ended. Her voice carried peace rather than pain. Daniel realized that he stood before someone transformed beyond his reach. The conversation ended quietly, leaving him alone with the weight of realization. Across the courtyard, Elena observed from a distance, not intruding. She saw understanding pass between them and recognized the truth she could not ignore. Later that night, she spoke to Danielle with calm clarity. She explained that marriage built on uncertainty could not survive indefinitely. She did not blame Mara or accuse him of betrayal. Instead, she acknowledged that both of them had entered the relationship seeking security rather than emotional alignment. Her words were measured, dignified, and final. Daniel felt the foundation of his carefully constructed life begin to shift. As Mara left the venue, exhaustion mixed with relief. She sensed the emotional climax approaching, though not through confrontation or revenge. Something larger was unfolding, a natural consequence of choices made long ago. She walked through the empty halls one last time, touching the walls she helped shape, understanding that this space marked the closing of one chapter and the opening of another. Behind her, conversations between Daniel and Elena continued late into the night, filled with honesty neither had previously allowed themselves. The illusion of perfection dissolved quietly, replaced by difficult clarity. Mara drove home beneath city lights reflecting against wet pavement, recalling the night months earlier when she had watched Danielle leave her apartment in the rain. The memory no longer hurt. It felt distant, almost necessary. She realized the greatest transformation had not been professional success or social recognition. It had been emotional freedom. And somewhere behind her, in a world she no longer needed to belong to, consequences were finally catching up with the choices that once shattered her life. Preparing the stage for a resolution neither revenge nor resentment could have achieved alone. In the weeks following the gala, silence replaced spectacle. Yet, beneath that quiet surface, lives began rearranging themselves in irreversible ways. Publicly, nothing appeared dramatic. Social media still displayed carefully curated images of Danielle and Elena attending events together, smiling beside philanthropists and investors, maintaining the illusion of stability expected from people in their position. But privately, distance settled into their marriage with undeniable permanence. Conversations became formal, stripped of warmth. Shared routines felt rehearsed rather than natural. Elena, who had always approached life strategically, began confronting truths she could no longer ignore. She realized she had not stolen Danielle from another woman out of cruelty. She had simply accepted a version of him shaped by fear. Now that fear lingered between them like an unspoken guest neither could dismiss. One evening, she invited Danielle to sit with her in the expansive living room overlooking the city. The lights below flickered like distant stars, emphasizing how high they had climbed socially and how isolated they felt emotionally. Elena spoke calmly, without accusation. She told him she did not regret marrying him, but she refused to continue living inside uncertainty. She admitted she had come to admire Mara deeply, not as a rival but as someone who embodied emotional clarity. Danielle listened quietly, realizing Elena was offering honesty rather than confrontation. She explained that love should feel chosen every day, not compared against memories or possibilities. When she asked whether he could truly give her that certainty, Danielle hesitated too long. The silence answered for him. Their separation unfolded with surprising dignity. No scandal reached the press. Official statements framed the decision as mutual and respectful. Yet, within their social circles, speculation spread rapidly. Some blamed Daniel's lingering attachment to his past. Others admired Elena's composure, interpreting her decision as strength rather than defeat. Through it all, Mara remained unaware of the details. She focused entirely on work, traveling frequently, as new projects expanded her career beyond national recognition. Invitations arrived from international firms, impressed by her ability to merge emotional storytelling with architectural precision. In unfamiliar cities, she discovered a version of herself untouched by heartbreak, someone capable of navigating independence with confidence rather than loneliness. During a conference in Vienna, Mara delivered a keynote presentation discussing how personal adversity shapes creative vision. She spoke openly, though without naming specifics, about loss becoming a catalyst for growth. The audience responded with profound emotion. Afterward, young designers approached her, sharing stories of rejection, failure, and reinvention. Mara realized her experience had evolved into something larger than personal healing. It had become inspiration for others searching for resilience. Meanwhile, Daniel struggled to redefine himself outside both relationships. Without Elena's structured world or Mara's emotional grounding, he faced an unfamiliar emptiness. For the first time, he examined his own patterns honestly. He recognized how often he pursued external validation to avoid confronting insecurity. Therapy sessions he initially resisted slowly revealed uncomfortable truths. He had mistaken ambition for identity and security for love. Growth came painfully, stripped of the shortcuts wealth once provided. One afternoon, months later, Mara returned home after extended travel to find a handwritten letter waiting at her door. The handwriting was unmistakable. Daniel's. She hesitated before opening it, unsure whether revisiting the past would disturb the peace she had built. Inside, he did not ask for reconciliation. Instead, he apologized sincerely, acknowledging that leaving her had been less about love fading and more about his fear of inadequacy. He admitted he had believed success required abandoning vulnerability. Only after losing both relationships did he understand that emotional courage mattered more than status. Mara read the letter slowly, feeling neither anger nor longing. She recognized growth in his words, but also understood that healing had moved them onto separate paths. She placed the letter aside gently, appreciating closure without reopening attachment. Days later, Sophia invited her to a small gathering celebrating the launch of a community restoration project Mara had championed. Unlike elite galas, this event felt intimate and meaningful. Families, artists, and local residents filled the restored space with genuine gratitude. Children ran through corridors once abandoned, laughter replacing decay. Watching the community interact within a structure she helped revive filled Mara with deeper fulfillment than any prestigious recognition. She realized success meant creating environments where others could thrive, not simply achieving personal acclaim. As evening settled, Sophia observed her quietly, and remarked that Mara had crossed an invisible threshold. She was no longer defined by reaction to past pain. She acted purely from purpose. Mara smiled, recognizing the truth. She felt complete in ways she once believed required romantic partnership, not closed off to love, but no longer dependent on it for identity. Around the same time, news reached her indirectly about Danielle and Elena's separation. A colleague mentioned it casually, unaware of the personal significance. Mara absorbed the information with calm acceptance. There was no triumph in hearing it, no sense of vindication, only understanding that life corrects imbalance naturally. People eventually confront the consequences of choices made from fear rather than authenticity. Weeks later, she encountered Elena unexpectedly at an art exhibition. Their meeting held none of the tension one might expect. Elena greeted her warmly, expressing gratitude again for the gala and for conversations that had prompted personal reflection. She explained that ending the marriage had been painful but necessary, allowing both of them to pursue lives aligned with truth rather than expectation. Mara listened respectfully, sensing peace in Elena's demeanor. The encounter felt symbolic. Two women once connected through rivalry, now connected through growth. They parted with mutual respect, free from resentment. As winter approached, Mara received an offer to lead an ambitious international project, restoring historic coastal towns affected by environmental damage. Accepting meant relocating for extended periods, embracing uncertainty once again. She accepted without hesitation. The decision marked a final internal shift. Where she once sought stability above all else, she now welcomed evolution. On her last evening before departure, she walked through her apartment, reflecting on the journey that began with abandonment. She remembered standing alone after Daniel left, convinced her life had collapsed. Now she saw that moment as a doorway rather than an ending. Heartbreak had stripped away illusions, revealing strength she might never have discovered otherwise. At the airport the next morning, she paused before boarding, watching strangers reunite, say goodbye, begin new chapters. She felt gratitude for every step that led her here, the pain, the growth, the unexpected intersections with people who changed her trajectory. Somewhere else in the city, Daniel continued rebuilding himself quietly, learning patience and humility through experiences unconnected to wealth or romance. Elena pursued philanthropic ventures independently, focusing on causes that aligned with her evolving values. None of their lives resembled what any of them once imagined, yet each carried lessons shaped by shared history. As the plane lifted into the sky, Mara watched the city shrink beneath clouds, understanding that closure rarely arrives as a single dramatic moment. Instead, it emerges gradually through acceptance, forgiveness, and the courage to move forward without needing the past to look different. The story that began with betrayal had transformed into something far more profound, a testament to how loss, when faced honestly, becomes the foundation for a life defined not by who lives, but by who we become afterward. Years passed more quietly than anyone expected, yet the passage of time revealed truths more clearly than confrontation ever could. Mara's life unfolded across continents, each new project carrying echoes of the resilience she had built from loss. Coastal restorations transformed abandoned villages into thriving cultural centers. Communities once overlooked began attracting artists, historians, and travelers drawn not only by beauty, but by purpose. Her work gained international recognition, though fame never became her motivation. She chose projects that healed rather than impressed, believing spaces could restore dignity to people who have forgotten what hope looked like. Interviews often asked about the philosophy behind her designs. She answered consistently. Environments should remind people that endings are rarely final. Those words carried personal meaning she never fully explained publicly. Meanwhile, Daniel's world grew smaller, but more honest. Without the protective layers of status driven relationships, He confronted ordinary life for the first time in years. He changed careers gradually, moving away from aggressive investment culture towards consulting work focused on sustainable development. The shift surprised former colleagues who viewed ambition solely through financial success. Yet Daniel found unexpected satisfaction in slower progress, projects measured by impact rather than profit. Therapy, reflection, and solitude reshaped him in ways external success never had. He learned to sit with discomfort rather than escape it, to recognize patterns he once ignored. The transformation was not dramatic or heroic, it was quiet, deliberate, and humbling. Alina's journey unfolded with equal evolution. After the separation, she redirected her resources into philanthropic initiatives, supporting women entrepreneurs and educational access programs. Freed from expectations tied to marriage, she discovered a deeper sense of autonomy. Public perception painted her as resilient and composed, but privately she embraced vulnerability she had long avoided. She admitted to friends that losing certainty forced her to discover authentic purpose. In an unexpected way, the collapse of her marriage became liberation rather than failure. Though their paths diverged, all three carried invisible threads, connecting them to the same turning point years earlier. One autumn evening, fate arranged another intersection. An international architecture symposium invited Mara as keynote speaker and Danielle as a sustainability consultant representing a development firm, partnering with her organization. Neither knew the other would attend until arrival. The conference hall buzzed with intellectual energy, professionals exchanging ideas about rebuilding cities for future generations. When Danielle saw Mara across the lobby, time seemed to pause, not with romantic longing, but with profound recognition. She looked different, not merely older, but fully settled within herself. Confidence radiated naturally, untouched by the need for approval. Mara noticed him moments later. Their eyes met briefly, acknowledging shared history without emotional turbulence. She approached first, offering a calm smile. The conversation that followed lacked awkwardness or unresolved tension. They spoke as equals shaped by parallel growth. Daniel congratulated her on achievements he had followed from afar. Mara thanked him sincerely, sensing genuine admiration rather than regret driven nostalgia. During a panel discussion later that day, Mara spoke about resilience in design, describing how rebuilding requires acceptance of what cannot be restored exactly as it once was. Danielle listened from the audience, understanding the metaphor extended far beyond architecture. Afterward, they walked together along a river near the conference center. The evening air carried the softness of closure neither had anticipated. Daniel admitted he had once believed losing her was his greatest mistake. Now he saw it differently. Losing her forced him to confront himself honestly. He thanked her, not for forgiveness, but for being part of the lesson that changed his life. Mara listened thoughtfully before responding. She explained that pain often feels personal, but serves a larger purpose. Their relationship had taught her self-worth she might never have discovered otherwise. She no longer viewed the breakup as betrayal. It had simply been a necessary turning point for both of them. There was no lingering question about reconciliation. The possibility no longer existed because neither person needed it. They had become strangers connected by gratitude rather than longing. As they parted that evening, Danielle experienced a profound sense of peace mixed with quiet sorrow. The understanding that some loves are meant to transform rather than endure. He watched her walk away without the urge to follow. For the first time, acceptance replaced regret completely. Weeks after the symposium, Mara received an invitation to speak at a global humanitarian summit, recognizing individuals whose work created lasting social impact. Standing before leaders, innovators, and activists, she shared a story about resilience without naming names. She spoke of a woman abandoned at the moment she expected lifelong commitment, a woman who believed her future had collapsed. She described how that loss became the foundation for discovering purpose beyond romantic validation. The audience listened in silence before erupting into applause. Among the attendees watching remotely through a live broadcast were Danielle and Elena, both independently following her speech. Though separated by distance and circumstance, they shared the same realization. Mara's success was never revenge, it was evolution. Her happiness did not depend on proving anyone wrong, it came from becoming fully herself. In the months that followed, Mara continued traveling, mentoring young architects, and expanding projects that revitalized forgotten places. She developed friendships rooted in authenticity rather than shared ambition. Occasionally, she dated, exploring connection without urgency. Love no longer represented rescue or completion, it became companionship chosen freely. One evening, while walking along a restored seaside promenade she had helped design years earlier, she paused to watch families laughing beneath warm lights reflecting on the water. The scene mirrored the emotional landscape she had built within herself. Open, balanced, alive. She realized poetic justice rarely appears as dramatic revenge. Instead, it unfolds when those who once underestimated you witness your peace. From a distance they can never cross again. Daniel eventually remarried years later, this time slowly, carefully, choosing partnership built on honesty rather than aspiration. Elena expanded her philanthropic foundation internationally, becoming respected not for wealth but for meaningful impact. Each carried lessons born from shared history, their lives continuing forward without resentment. And Mara, once defined by abandonment, became defined by creation. The engagement ring she once returned existed only as memory, no longer symbolizing loss but transformation. Standing by the ocean that evening, she felt gratitude rather than sadness for the woman she used to be. The woman who cried in an empty apartment believing everything had ended. She understood now that endings often disguise beginnings too profound to recognize at the time. The story had never been about being left behind. It had always been about discovering the strength to walk forward alone until life met her again on her own terms, completing a journey shaped not by betrayal, but by growth strong enough to turn heartbreak into destiny fulfilled. The years continued unfolding with quiet certainty, carrying Mara farther from the life she once imagined, yet closer to the person she was always meant to become. Success no longer arrived as sudden milestones, but as steady confirmation that she had built a life aligned with truth. Cities across the world carried her signature philosophy, spaces designed not simply to impress but to heal, to welcome, to remind people that renewal remains possible even after devastation. Journalists often try to trace her rise back to a defining moment, searching for a dramatic origin story that explained her resilience. Mara never corrected them when they spoke about ambition or talent. The real beginning she knew had been far more personal. The night she believed her future had collapsed entirely, that memory no longer carried pain. It felt like the opening chapter of a long lesson about self worth. One winter evening, she returned to the city where everything had changed years earlier. Snow drifted softly along familiar streets, transforming ordinary buildings into reflections of the past. She had been invited to receive an award, recognizing lifetime contribution to community architecture, an honor that surprised her, not because she doubted her work, but because time had passed so quickly. Walking through the city stored memories she had not revisited in years. The cafe where she once waited nervously for Danielle after work, the small park where they planned their future, the apartment building where she learned what it meant to lose someone she loved. Yet, instead of sadness, she felt compassion for her younger self. That woman I believed love defined her destiny. Now she understood destiny was something she shaped herself. The award ceremony gathered professionals, community leaders, and former collaborators. Among the attendees were familiar faces from her past, people who had witnessed fragments of her journey without ever understanding its full emotional depth. As she stepped onto the stage, applause filled the hall, but her attention briefly caught movement near the back of the room. Daniel stood there quietly, older, calmer, accompanied by his wife, a woman whose warmth reflected partnership rather than performance. Their eyes met for only a second. He smiled, not with longing, not with regret, but with genuine pride. Eleanor was there as well, seated beside colleagues from her foundation, applauding enthusiastically. The moment felt surreal, yet peaceful. All three lives had moved forward, no longer tangled in unfinished emotion. When Mara began her speech, she paused before speaking, allowing silence to settle naturally. She did not discuss awards or professional achievements. Instead, she spoke about change. She described how people often fear endings because they imagine loss means failure. She explained that sometimes life removes what feels certain, so individuals can discover strength they never knew existed. Her words resonated deeply, not as performance, but as life truth. She spoke of forgiveness, not as something granted to others, but as a gift given to oneself. Forgiveness allowed her to release bitterness, to stop asking why things happened, and instead ask who she could become afterward. The audience listened in stillness, sensing authenticity beyond rehearsed inspiration. When she finished, the standing ovation lasted long enough for emotion to rise unexpectedly in her chest. After the ceremony, guests gathered for conversation and celebration. Daniel approached respectfully, introducing his wife warmly. The interaction felt natural, free from tension. He thanked Mara again for the role she unknowingly played in his growth, explaining that learning from past mistakes had allowed him to build a healthier life. Mara congratulated him sincerely, feeling no trace of the heartbreak that once defined their connection. Elena joined them moments later, embracing Mara briefly like an old friend. The three shared laughter about how unpredictable life had been, acknowledging without words how far they had all traveled emotionally. Their brief reunion carried no drama, only closure shaped by time and understanding. Later that night, Mara walked alone through the quiet streets. Snow crunched beneath her steps, and city lights reflected gently across frozen sidewalks. She stopped near the building where she once lived, staring up at windows glowing with unfamiliar lives. Somewhere inside, another couple might be planning a future, believing certainty would protect them forever. She smiled softly, wishing them happiness while understanding that growth often arrives through unexpected disruption. She realized she no longer defined herself as the woman who was left behind. She was the woman who continued forward. Weeks later, during a Costa project opening ceremony, Mara received news that one of her mentorship students had won a major international design competition. The young architect credited Mara's guidance publicly, explaining that her mentor taught her to transform rejection into vision. Hearing those words affected Mara more deeply than any award. Legacy, she realized, was not measured by buildings, but by people empowered to believe in themselves. Standing beside the ocean afterward, watching waves roll endlessly toward shore, she reflected on the strange symmetry of life. The heartbreak that once felt unbearable had redirected a path toward purpose, independence, and authentic connection. She understood now that poetic justice does not require anyone to suffer. It simply allows truth to reveal itself over time. Those who act from fear eventually confront its limits. Those who grow through pain discover freedom. And sometimes the greatest victory is not proving someone wrong, but becoming so fulfilled that the past loses its power entirely. Mara breathed deeply, feeling gratitude settle within her, like calm water after a storm. She thought briefly of the engagement ring she once returned, the tears she shed, believing she had lost everything. In reality, she had lost only a future that no longer fit who she was meant to become. Ahead of her stretched open horizons, projects yet imagined, relationships yet formed, and moments of quiet happiness unconnected to validation or comparison. She walked forward along the shoreline, as evening light softened the world around her, understanding that healing had never been about replacing love but expanding beyond it. Her story ended not with revenge, not with reconciliation, but with peace earned through resilience. Somewhere, viewers watching her journey might recognize pieces of their own lives: the betrayal, the doubt, the fear of starting over. And if there was a lesson hidden within everything that happened, it was simple. Sometimes the person who walks away believes they are choosing a better future, but the one left behind becomes the author of a greater one. True fulfillment arrives when we stop chasing acceptance from others and begin building a life that reflects our own worth. And in that realization, Mara finally understood that nothing had been taken from her at all. She had been given the rare opportunity to discover who she truly was, and she never looked back again.